Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. This is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. And I am super excited to have Traci L. Jones here with me today. Born in Monmouth, Illinois, to Ada Groff and the late Senator Regis Groff, Traci was raised in Denver, Colorado. She and her husband, Tony Jones, have 4 children and live in the Denver metropolitan area. While raising her kids and helping with the pharmacy, Ms. Jones was reminded of her love for writing and began working toward earning a creative writing certificate at the University of Denver. One of those courses led to the writing and completion of her first book, Standing Against the Wind, published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. I hope I'm saying that correctly,
You
Giroux,
said it perfectly, which is unusual.
in 2006. And her first novel won the Coretta Scott King John Steptoe New Talent Award, which is just such a cool
It
claim to
was
fame.
great. Yeah. So they don't give it off every time, give it out every year. So it was very special.
Yeah, well, a very belated congratulations. That
Well,
sounds amazing.
thank you.
Her second book, Finding My Place, was published in 2010 by the same company. Her third book, Silhouetted by the Blue, was published in 2015. And her fourth book, Ransoming the Captive, was published in 2022 by Black Rose Publishing. Traci L. Jones is a mentor slash instructor with the Masters in Fine Arts Creative Writing program at Regis University in Denver, Colorado. She also teaches writing at Lighthouse Writing Workshop in Denver, Colorado, and literature for the honors program at University of Colorado at Denver. So thank you so much for taking time to talk to me.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, so before we dive into the topic for today, which is YA fiction, and I'm so excited to pick your brain. I haven't talked to somebody who specializes in young adult fiction before now, in a more academic sense. But anyway, before we get into all of that, can you tell me a little bit more about how you got into writing? I know you mentioned some things in that snippet there, but give us a little more insight if you would.
Well, if you're going to go all the way back, my mother gave me a typewriter during Christmas when I was in fourth grade. And that's really when I started writing. She noticed that I love to read, and she probably noticed that she had gotten a new electronic typewriter, and I was always on it. So I think she was like, I'm just going to give her own non-electric typewriter to keep her from playing with mine. And I spent that Christmas break writing. And then you jump ahead. I was going to be an English major in college. And my first English professors told me I was a horrible writer. So I switched from English to psychology. And then if you jump ahead, there was a point in my life, my husband and I owned pharmacies, and I was doing the bookkeeping, and I have never been a fan of math and numbers. And that's what I felt, that's what was taking up a good portion of my time, along with the 4 kids that I have. So,
I can't imagine.
yeah, but even when, in the midst of all that busyness, I felt like there was something missing creatively.
Hmm.
And that's when I was just rifling through the paper, and I found this ad for the University of Denver. They had a kind of a nighttime program for creative writing. And so that program is what took me back to writing. And it kind of reignited my love of creative writing and of reading. And in terms of finding like the YA genre, I feel like every writer sort of has a natural niche for their writing. Um, Especially for YA authors, I feel like we really can remember, if not the exact feeling, well, it's not the exact like sort of day to day of YA of teen living. We can remember the sort of the ethos, the feeling behind those times, and that's what we use to create our stories. Is there are some sort of universal truths to teen life, and we can really tap into those and write about them, hopefully honestly and realistically.
Yeah, I was going to ask what drew you to the field of YA
YA.
fiction. I love it myself. You can see some of the titles back there. It's
Yeah.
one of the main genres that I enjoy as a reader, but you teach it. So how did that come about? Was there already a program in place for YA fiction?
So, for teaching, it was really there was another author I met who the very first time was at an event for authors, I had my little books in front of me, and the woman next to me had like a display, and she had candy. She had candy because part of something in her story there was something about blow pops, I think. So she had apple blow pops, and she had bookmarks, and I thought, and I was there literally with just my books, just me and my books. And so I started talking to her. Her name is Denise Vega. And we sort of, kind of hit it off, and we kind of kept in touch. And then, really out of the blue, the founders, the Regis MFA program, which is where I first started teaching, it's a fairly new program. It's a low res MFA program. And it's only been around since I think 2015, 2016.
Okay, yeah.
So
So
it's
that
very,
feels brand new.
yeah, it feels very new. And the founders, David Hicks and Marty McGovern, they called and said, "Hey, we got your name and number from Denise Vega. We're looking for instructors who write what we want them to teach."
Hmm.
And so they were gathering poets, they were gathering nonfiction, they were gathering graphic novelists. And I went in and interviewed, and they were like, "Oh, we'd love for you to teach in our second residency." So we have in the program, we have 8 days in January and 8 days in June where everybody, all the students and all the faculty and mentors come in and spend 8 days with craft and seminars and lectures and panel discussions. And so I did the second residency for them. And, I was terrified. It was something completely new. I had never taught anything before. And it's kind of been, especially as I've gotten older, assigned to me that if something scares me, it's probably a challenge I should try and weigh into, right?
Hmm.
Because you don't grow without that sort of mental pain, right? You need to have a little bit of a challenge. You need to be scared a little in order to grow and take yourself to the next level. So that's why I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I was terrified. And I was apparently one of the hardest teachers because I was like, I must give homework because that's what teachers do. So I was giving them homework, and they were all stressed out. And so it's like, oh, maybe I've blown
You've
my
got to practice
and
stuff.
I
I
get
mean,
to
I'm a teacher
practice.
too. You have to
You
practice
have to
the stuff
practice.
yourself with your own
Right.
brain.
You have to, yeah. But as I've taught, I hope I've gotten better and better. And it was a love that I didn't know I had. And
Hmm.
so each time, and then I had a friend who is at the University of Colorado at Denver who took over their honors program, and she was looking for people to do elective classes. And she's like, "Yeah, I'm going to get you in there. Just hold on." I was like, "I don't know what I can't. I can't just do writing because of the way the program is structured." She's like, "Oh, we'll figure it out." And she's like, "Okay, I need you to teach next semester, and I think you can do literature and just combine it with something." I was like, "You have gone mad. I don't teach literature." But I've created a curriculum that is really fun to teach. We look at teen representation in both literature and in movies historically. So we start in the 1950s, and we
Hmm.
read 1950s, and we watch Rebel Without a Cause, and we go through all the different decades, and we talk
Hmm.
about the history that is surrounding with this history of what is taking place when these works are created. And it's just a really fun class. So um, that's how I started teaching. It was just, you know, kind of luck. It's just two people I knew who were like, "Yeah, you can do it." And me telling myself, "You're going to try and do it, whether you think you can or not."
That class sounds completely fascinating. The idea of how teenagers have been portrayed and
It
throughout
is fascinating.
Yeah, I
It is
that
fascinating.
I want to know more about that, but I'm trying to stay
Try to stay
on
focused on
on
YA.
track
Yes.
here.
Yes.
Yes, on lit specifically. So now, I'll be in a bookstore, I'll be shopping for YA, and even people who I know that are readers that read all the time that like YA,
Mhm.
they'll be confused about what that designation actually means. Does it mean that it's clean, that there's like no
No,
language, no sex, you know? Does it mean that
absolutely
it's
not.
for 11-year-olds? It's like, well, not that's
Not
a separate thing.
exactly.
That's middle
Right, that's a
grades, you know?
separate thing, yeah. Is it for
So
20-year-olds? No, that's a separate thing.
right. So how would
Yeah.
you define YA? I have
I
only a
mean,
couple of things that kind of spring to mind because I've written it and whatnot, but from your perspective, what defines it?
historically, it used to really be sort of subject matter
Hmm.
and portrayal, but in this day and age, it really has less to do with subject and more to do with primarily the age of your character.
Hmm.
Now, that's not to say that adult literature can't have a 15-year-old main character, but it's really how you as a writer are writing that character. So in adult literature, if you have a 15-year-old, generally speaking, there is an adult looking back at the 15-year-old, or the 15-year-old, even there's a bit of an adult knowledge to the 15-year-old, but in
Hmm.
YA
Interesting.
everything is told and felt, and the perspective is through that first time love, that sort of teen perspective, as opposed to an adult looking back at their teen years and telling the story of their teen years, right? There's a little bit of that adult knowledge in adult novels that is not there in YA.
Hmm.
So yes, there's an age designation, but as you well know, a lot of the YA is so well written that a lot of adults read it. You
Oh,
know,
definitely. I mean, a
yeah,
good book is a good book. I've
a
said
good
this
book is a
for
good book,
for
right?
ages, but it's just a particular kind
Right.
of
It's really about
book.
the character perspective, right? And
Like
the,
its
the
immediacy
knowledge
and the
base that
age,
that
or
character brings to the story.
hmm. So what are
If that
some
makes sense.
ingredients, in your opinion, to great YA? There's a lot of YA out there. It's not all, you know,
Well, it's
excellent.
like anything, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
Whenever you have
yeah,
a lot of people doing something, singing
yeah.
in a music genre or something, it's not all going to be excellent, but some of it is. So,
I
what are
feel
some of
like
those things that make YA great YA what it is?
I think with great YA, there's a feeling that you and the character have learned or grown by the end of the book. There is a very high focus on character development in YA, right? That character arc, where the character that you meet at the beginning of the book is not the character generally at the end of the book, right? I mean, there are some like Artemis Fowl, even Artemis Fowl, who is kind of a shady character at the beginning. He's kind of a shady character at the end, but through the series, though, right, you feel like he's growing and maturing. There's like a level of maturity that happens in YA, or it should happen in YA, that makes the reader feel like, oh, okay, we have taken a journey with this character, and now I can see what they've learned or how they're different than at the beginning, right? It's sort of the anti-Seinfeld thing, where Seinfeld was written where they don't ever learn. There's no lessons, and there's no hugs at the end. Whereas with YA, I feel like in order for it to be a well-written YA, you have to have those lessons, those hugs, that sort of, oh, this when I as I leave you character that I'm reading, I think you're going to be okay
Hmm. And that the reader went along that journey with them, that
with them.
it drew them in
And right, and yes, and
right.
really good YA makes you laugh and cry, and mostly, there are points where you just have to cringe, especially as an adult reading back. You're like, oh, don't do it. Oh, then they do it. You want that. and that means that, you as a reader are fully engaged with the
Mm.
characters, and you really want the best for them. So
So what
that's
are
what I'm
some
looking for.
sorry, I didn't mean to
That's
talk
okay.
over you. So what are a couple examples that you think that come to mind when I say great YA that maybe not everybody has had the chance to read?
You know, I I read so many that it's hard to pick. That I know there are authors who I think are very good that may not get the. I mean, like Tiffany D. Jackson, I think is a really interesting. Her stories are very interesting, and very different. I think from most YA. I'm a big fan of Nicola Yoon. I love her romances.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Um, Recently just I'm reading one that I was kind of on the fence about, but I'm been liking it more and more. It's a debut novel from Jane Thomas, that I really think is is getting good. I can see that it's gonna be a novel that I probably will talk about a little more. Um, I do have some that I've recommended. Like The Black Flamingo is one of my I don't generally read novels written in verse, but this is a novel written in verse that I think is
Hmm.
very good. It's by Atta. Oh, The Emotion of Great Delight is another very good book, and it's by Tahara Malfi. The Emotion of Great Delight.
That's one
I
I haven't heard
Oh
about from
yeah,
her.
it's really very interesting. I love it's written about Muslims right after 9/11.
Hmm.
And it's really interesting. It's very non-political in a way. It's
Hmm.
really about friendships and first loves with but it's surrounded with the frame of reference of being a Muslim in America. And it's really those books I really enjoy. There's a book called Sleeping in Jeans, which is about a homeless
Hmm.
girl and her family. So, you know, I don't know if I have one I can recommend except for a couple of them, but there are, I think, authors who are doing really interesting and tackling really substantive subjects in YA that I think people should read.
So that brings me to my next question. Sometimes I feel like people perceive adult writing as the best, YA, and kind of as you get younger, it's like the skill level kind of goes down, or the quality, or the importance or something goes
Right.
down, which I think is a massive misperception. But I think you already touched on it. But what would you say is the importance of YA lit? This is your area. This is
It
your
is I
love.
love it. First of all, I think that it's a misconception to think that adult novels are better written than YA novels. I find for the most part YA novels much better written than adult novels. I feel like there's a lot of bad adult novels that can sneak through because so many are published
Hmm.
and not as many YAs are published, and so they're held to a higher standard. I think YAs tackle everything that adult, for the most part, the sort of subjects that they tackle in a very interesting, compelling way that I don't know that adults can. I think because you have to have your main character resonate, hopefully, with your readers. I think the main characters are sometimes better written and more compelling than young adults. So if I was given a choice between reading a YA and reading any adult, I would probably choose a YA first because
Hmm.
I would think that it's better written. So
Wow, that's a bold claim. You just
it is a bold claim, but
flipped the
I'm
script
sticking to
there.
it, and I do feel that. I do feel that YA, for the most part, are they're just better written.
Hmm.
because you really have to grab, especially this generation. I mean, it's getting harder and harder for the older adults to write for this generation. There was a sort of a commonality that we've kind of lost with social media. So, I'm a Gen X, I'm an early Gen X, born in the 60s person who grew up my teen years for the most part were in the 80s.
Hmm.
And that sort of teen life is vastly different from 2023 with the social media and just the amount of input that kids are getting that we didn't get it, in the 1980s, just because we had four channels and, it was a different way to come into an adulthood than they have. And because I don't understand some of those pressures, it is getting a little hard to write for to somebody who has a teen experience that I don't understand fully.
That makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
to me. You're competing with so many choices,
So
and
many
that
choices.
you need to hook more
But
quickly than you probably
yeah.
have ever had to do before, and keep attention, and
Now
even just
readers are readers.
and
Now
things like that.
that's I think is, my niece who is turning 21 in October is a reader, right? And she's always been a reader regardless. But you do, even I as a reader, sometimes I'm like, I should read, and then I'll sit down and play 30 levels of Candy Crush, right? As a teen,
Absolutely.
right? So
Not every time, but it
it,
happens,
it
definitely.
happens, right? So there's a lot more competition. And so, especially with that competition, I think there are fewer books published. And so everything is just getting tighter and harder for authors. And so you really do have to grab the reader.
So what advice would you give on top of that to people out there who want to become YA authors if they're not already?
Well, I can give like general writing advice and then I'll kind of tailor it for YA. What really changed for me is I had written story upon story and I didn't get published until I started taking classes, right? So I joined the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators and started going to their conventions and taking classes. And then I, started taking classes to get the creative writing certificate at DU. And it was only after that my writing improved enough because I understood the craft,
Hmm.
right? I started under thinking about the components that go into a great story, as opposed to just writing down the story and not thinking about character arc or thinking about setting or thinking about dialogue and why it's in there. Right. My writing became much more structured and purposeful. And it was only
Hmm.
after that I could, you know, gain attention from an editor if from in the slush pile. But it was only after learning the craft and putting it into practice. So as a writer, that is really always what I tell people is learn the craft. Even if you've been writing, if you've never taken a writing class, you should take a writing class. Even if it's, getting feedback, even if it's a class where you read everybody's work and you learn how to critique and take critique of your own work, that's helpful as well. If you want to write YA, you really have to be able to tap into those teen memories, Think about what most embarrassed you, think about how it felt to see the crush in the hall, think about how angry what your parents did to make you angry. You really have to tap into often a chat into those memories that some people just want to forget. I think there are specific types of people who can write YA, and it's either people who had a perfectly fine childhood and can remember things, or people who had a horrible childhood and can remember things, right? There has to be some sort of gravitas to what you're writing, and you have to be able to tap into those feelings and be able to express them and put them in.
Just have show that humanity
Surely,
and
you're
that
right. Yeah.
just dig into pain. I think that's true of most writing, but it is specific for YA to go to those
Well, because you have to
particular
remember
teen
what it was
years.
like. Yeah, you have to remember the pangs of your first heartbreak. You have to remember those things,
Mm,
and be able to describe kind of the physicality of those things. The butterflies and the blushing and all those things.
right.
And often teen years are not the best. You're always sort of cringing at what you didn't know, and you're like, do yeah. So you have to be okay with that in order to write YA.
Yeah, it's such an incredibly important time. I teach high school, so
Uh,
students who are 15, 16, and it's not the easiest or anything, but I feel like there is so much potential and there's so much, you can see some people go from the beginning of sophomore year to the end, and it's just this transformative
yeah, it is so
time for
transformative,
them.
right?
So that's another reason why YA I think appeals to me because it has
Yeah.
that sort of transformative ability
Right. You can
that
just see the
some other
growth
books don't.
or the change, right? Sometimes it's not
Mhm.
even growth, it's just change. It's like you have this quiet little mousy girl at the beginning of the year, and suddenly by the end she's like goth and has just done this trend, and you're like, "Well, something's going on there. Something mentally happened, for good or for bad." But it's those things that I find fascinating, right? I just find it fascinating,
Yeah.
and I love
Yeah.
to read about that.
Yeah, it's a really worthwhile time to dig into. So, yeah, I was so happy when I found somebody who taught and specialized in this, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate you giving your thoughts on the genre. So,
Oh,
for people who want to
anytime.
find you, your classes, your books, just all your stuff online, where can they do that?
Well, I have a website, tracyljones.com. I'm not great with keeping it up to date, but now that you've mentioned it, I'll put it on my list, and I will at least give the link to Lighthouse Workshop. I teach there, maybe every other month. Sometimes I just do a 1 hour class, sometimes it's a 2 hour class, but I really encourage it. They're very affordable. They have these daily Zoom classes that are $40 for 1 hour,
Hmm.
and they really delve deep into like setting or dialogue or the use of time, just things like that. Um, and then if I ever have a signing, I usually stick it on the events page. Or you can just go straight to lighthousewritingworkshop.com and find me. Or there's on my website, just how you contacted me, there's that little, and I answered back fairly quickly because it comes straight to my email, and forever in front of my computer. So I'm pretty easy
Again,
to get. Yeah.
I'll put all those links down below for people who are
Okay.
interested in learning more and maybe looking into the Lighthouse Writers Workshop as well. So, thanks again so much for joining me today. This has been a fascinating talk.
Well,
So,
thank you so much.
make sure to subscribe, like the video, and check out the rest of the channel for more great interviews and content. So, until next week, bye.
Bye.